The Golden Cage. My name is Charlotte Whitmore, and I was born into one of the wealthiest families in Victorian England. From the outside, my life seemed perfect. Our mansion stood on a hill overlooking miles of green countryside. We had dozens of servants, beautiful gardens, expensive horses, and enough money to buy almost anything we desired. People often looked at our family with admiration and envy. They believed we lived without worries. They could not have been more mistaken. Every morning began before sunrise. A maid entered my room carrying a basin of warm water. She helped me dress in layers of heavy clothing that felt more like armor than fashion. My corset was tightened until I could barely breathe comfortably. Mother insisted that a proper young lady must maintain perfect posture at all times. Breakfast was served precisely at 8 o'clock. Being late was considered a serious offense. The dining room was enormous, yet it often felt cold and silent. Father sat at the head of the table reading newspapers and discussing business matters. My brothers were expected to prepare for leadership roles in society. Their education focused on politics, finance, and management. My education was very different. I was taught music, embroidery, French, and proper manners. Everyone expected me to become a respectable wife one day. No one seemed interested in what I actually wanted. Victorian society had strict rules for wealthy young women. Every movement was watched. Every word was judged. A simple conversation with a gentleman could become the subject of gossip. Even laughter had limits. A lady was expected to appear calm, graceful, and modest at all times. Sometimes I felt as though I was performing on a stage from morning until night. The servants knew more about our family than anyone outside the house. They witnessed every argument hidden behind closed doors. They saw Mother's constant anxiety about our reputation. They heard Father's angry discussions about investments and political connections. Wealth protected us from many hardships, but it also created pressures that never seemed to disappear. One afternoon, while walking through the library, I discovered an old journal that had belonged to my grandmother. Inside were stories of adventures, travel, and dreams that she had never been allowed to pursue. As I turned the yellowed pages, I realized something unsettling. The women in my family had lived in luxury for generations, yet many of them had felt trapped. That evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the estate, I stood by my bedroom window and stared at the distant horizon. Somewhere beyond those fields was a world I knew almost nothing about, a world filled with possibilities, dangers, and freedom. At that moment, I had no idea that my life was about to change forever, and that the secrets hidden within the Whitmore family would soon threaten everything we had. The invitation. The following morning began like every other day at Whitmore Manor. The servants moved quietly through the halls. Breakfast was served exactly on time, and Father discussed business matters while barely looking up from his newspaper. Yet something felt different. I could not stop thinking about my grandmother's journal. Its pages had revealed a side of her life that no one had ever mentioned. The more I thought about it, the more questions filled my mind. After breakfast, I returned to the library hoping to continue reading, but the journal had disappeared. Every shelf was exactly as I had left it, yet the book was gone. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Someone else knew I had found it. Later that afternoon, Mother informed me that we would be attending a grand social gathering in London the following week. Such events were common among wealthy families. They were opportunities to strengthen connections, discuss marriages, and display social status. Normally, I dreaded these occasions. They involved hours of preparation and endless conversations about subjects that bored me. This time, however, something unexpected happened. While Mother described the guest list, she mentioned the name Ashford. The moment I heard it, I remembered seeing the same name several times in my grandmother's journal. Lord Ashford had apparently been one of her closest friends during her youth. When I asked Mother about him, her expression immediately changed. She became unusually quiet and instructed me never to ask about the Ashford family again. Her reaction only deepened my curiosity. During the following days, preparations for the trip consumed the household. Seamstresses arrived with new dresses. Servants packed trunks full of clothing and accessories. Every detail had to be perfect. Wealthy families were judged constantly, and a single mistake could damage a reputation. As the day of departure approached, I noticed Father holding several tense conversations behind closed doors. More than once, I heard raised voices coming from his study. One evening, while passing the door, I caught a few words, "That agreement, Ashford." Before I could hear more, the conversation stopped. The journey to London took nearly an entire day. As our carriage entered the city, I watched crowded streets filled with people from every class of society. Elegant ladies walked beside workers covered in soot from factories. Children sold newspapers on busy corners. It was a world far larger and more complicated than the sheltered life I had always known. That evening, as we arrived at our luxurious townhouse, a servant handed me a sealed envelope. There was no sender's name. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. "If you wish to learn the truth about your grandmother, come alone to Hyde Park at noon on Thursday." Beneath the message was a signature that made my heart race. Ashford. The meeting in Hyde Park, for 2 days. I carried the mysterious letter hidden inside my glove box, reading it whenever I found a moment alone. The words seemed simple, yet they filled my mind with endless questions. Who had sent it, and why now? Most importantly, what truth about my grandmother had been hidden for so many years? Thursday arrived beneath a gray London sky. At breakfast, I barely touched my food. Mother was occupied discussing an upcoming dinner party, while Father appeared distracted and unusually tense. Neither noticed my nervous silence. At 11 o'clock, I informed our housekeeper that I wished to visit a nearby bookshop. It was a small lie, but it granted me the freedom I needed. A hired carriage brought me to Hyde Park, where countless Londoners strolled along the pathways. Wealthy families rode in elegant carriages, children played near the lake, and gentlemen discussed politics beneath ancient trees. To anyone watching, it seemed like a perfectly ordinary afternoon. Yet my heart pounded with every step. I arrived at the location described in the letter, a quiet bench beneath a large oak tree. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then I noticed an elderly gentleman approaching from the opposite path. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his dark coat suggested a man of respectable status. As he drew closer, his eyes fixed on me with unmistakable recognition. "Miss Whitmore," he said softly, "you look exactly like your grandmother." I immediately knew who he was. Lord Ashford. He sat beside me and remained silent for a moment, studying the crowds around us. Finally, he reached into his coat and produced a small leather notebook. The sight of it made my breath catch. It matched the journal I had discovered in the library. "Your grandmother left this with me many years ago," he said. "She feared that one day her family would attempt to erase the truth." I listened carefully as he explained that he and my grandmother had shared a close friendship during their youth. According to society, they should have married. They cared deeply for one another. But powerful families often made decisions based on wealth rather than affection. My great-grandfather had forbidden the relationship and arranged a different marriage to protect the family's interests. The story sounded tragic enough. Yet Lord Ashford had not summoned me merely to share an old romance. "There is something else you must know," he continued. "Your family fortune was built upon a secret agreement between the Whitmores and several influential families, an agreement that still exists today." Before I could ask what he meant, his expression suddenly changed. He glanced toward a nearby pathway and immediately stood. "We are being watched," he whispered. "Follow me, and do not look behind you." As we hurried away from the bench, I caught sight of a tall man in a black coat observing us from across the park. The moment our eyes met, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. The hidden agreement. Lord Ashford led me through a series of winding pathways until we reached a quiet corner of Hyde Park where few people ventured. Only then did he slow his pace. I could still feel the unease left by the mysterious man in the black coat. Every passerby now seemed suspicious. Lord Ashford appeared equally concerned. He checked our surroundings carefully before speaking again. "The agreement I mentioned is older than you realize," he said. "Nearly 50 years ago, Several of England's wealthiest families formed a private alliance. Publicly, they competed with one another. Privately, they worked together to protect their fortunes and influence. The Whitmores were among the most powerful members. I listened in disbelief. Such arrangements sounded more like the plots of novels than reality. Yet Lord Ashford spoke with complete confidence. He explained that the alliance controlled investments, business opportunities, marriages, and political connections. Families who cooperated prospered. Families who refused often suffered financial ruin. The more he described it, the more I understood why my father seemed obsessed with reputation and social standing. Everything depended upon remaining within the alliance's favor. My grandmother discovered what was happening, Lord Ashford continued. Unlike most women of her time, she refused to accept the system without question. She began collecting information and recording everything she learned. The journal you found was only one part of her investigation. Before I could respond, he handed me the small leather notebook. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were names, dates, and detailed notes written in elegant handwriting. Some entries described secret meetings between powerful families. Others mentioned suspicious financial transactions. Near the final pages, one sentence stood out. "If anything happens to me, the truth must survive." A chill ran through my body. "What happened to her?" I asked quietly. Lord Ashford looked away for a moment. "Officially, she died from an illness. Unofficially, many of us believed there was more to the story." The words struck me like a blow. I had always accepted the family version of events. Now I wondered whether I had ever truly known my grandmother at all. Suddenly, the distant sound of carriage wheels echoed from a nearby road. Lord Ashford's expression hardened. "We do not have much time. There is a safe deposit box registered under a false name. Your grandmother arranged it decades ago. Inside are documents that could expose everything." Before I could ask where it was located, a voice interrupted us. "Miss Whitmore." We both turned. Standing only a few yards away was my father. His face was pale with anger. I had never seen him look so furious. Around him stood two men I did not recognize. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then father took a step forward. "Charlotte," he said coldly, "you are coming home immediately." In that instant, I realized he knew exactly why I had come to Hyde Park. And whatever secret he was protecting, he was willing to do anything to keep it buried. The return to Whitmore House, the carriage ride back to the townhouse was painfully silent. My father sat opposite me, his face cold and unreadable. The two men who had accompanied him remained outside with the driver, but their presence lingered in my thoughts. Lord Ashford had vanished before father reached us. Somehow he had escaped without being seen. The small notebook remained hidden beneath my coat, and I prayed father had not noticed. As the streets of London passed outside the window, countless questions raced through my mind. How had father known where to find me? Who were the men with him? And why was he so desperate to stop me from learning the truth? When we arrived, father immediately ordered the servants to leave us alone in his study. The heavy door closed behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me with an expression I had never seen before. "You will not meet Lord Ashford again," he said firmly. "You will not speak to him, write to him, or ask questions about him. Do you understand?" His voice carried an authority that would normally end any discussion. Yet something inside me had changed. I could no longer accept simple commands without explanation. "Why, father?" I asked. "What are you hiding?" His jaw tightened. "I am protecting this family. That is all you need to know." "Protecting us from what?" I pressed. The silence that followed felt endless. For a brief moment, I thought he might finally tell me the truth. Instead, he walked to the window and stared into the fog outside. "Some secrets exist for a reason, Charlotte. There are forces in this world far more powerful than you realize. Curiosity can destroy lives." The conversation ended there. No matter how many questions I asked, he refused to provide answers. That evening, a grand dinner party filled the townhouse with wealthy guests. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. Musicians performed elegant melodies. Gentlemen discussed politics and business, while ladies exchanged polite smiles. To outsiders, It was a picture of wealth and perfection. Yet beneath the surface, I noticed things I had never seen before. Certain guests exchanged meaningful glances when father entered the room. Private conversations stopped whenever I approached. Several unfamiliar men seemed to be quietly observing the gathering rather than participating in it. The alliance Lord Ashford described suddenly felt very real. Later that night, unable to sleep, I opened the notebook in my bedroom. By candlelight, I carefully studied every page. Near the back, I discovered something I had missed earlier. Folded between 2 pages was a small piece of paper. It contained only an address and a date written in my grandmother's handwriting. The address belonged to a bank in London. The date was less than a month before her death. My heart began to race. This had to be the location of the safe deposit box. Before I could examine it further, a faint sound came from the hallway outside my room. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Someone stopped directly outside my door. The handle moved slightly. I quickly extinguished the candle and hid the notebook beneath my mattress. In the darkness, I listened as the unknown visitor remained motionless on the other side of the door. Then, after several long seconds, the footsteps slowly retreated into the shadows. Whoever had been there was searching for something, and I feared they already suspected what I had found. The bank vault. The following morning, I woke after only a few hours of restless sleep. The memory of the footsteps outside my door haunted me. Whoever had been there had not entered, but their intentions were clear. Someone was searching for the notebook, and perhaps for me as well. During breakfast, I carefully observed every face around the table. Mother appeared preoccupied with social engagements. Father was unusually quiet, studying his newspaper with intense concentration. If he knew about the notebook, he showed no sign of it, yet I could not shake the feeling that he was hiding far more than he admitted. As soon as an opportunity presented itself, I slipped away from the townhouse. The address hidden within my grandmother's notebook led to a private bank, located in one of London's wealthiest districts. The building itself appeared ordinary from the outside. Its stone walls and tall windows blended seamlessly with the surrounding architecture, yet armed guards stood near the entrance, and every visitor was carefully observed. Inside, the atmosphere felt cold and formal. Wealthy clients moved quietly through marble halls while clerks worked behind polished wooden counters. My heart raced as I approached the manager's office. Using the information written by my grandmother, I explained that I had come regarding a deposit box registered under a specific name. The manager's expression changed immediately. Without asking further questions, he escorted me downstairs through a series of locked doors. Finally, we reached a massive steel vault. Rows of secure boxers lined the walls. The manager located one near the far corner and handed me a small key. "This box has remained untouched for more than 20 years, he said quietly. Once he left, I inserted the key and opened the compartment. Inside lay several envelopes tied together with a faded ribbon. There was also a photograph I had never seen before. It showed my grandmother standing beside Lord Ashford as young adults. Both were smiling. They looked genuinely happy. For a moment, I wondered how different their lives might have been if society had allowed them to follow their hearts. Then I opened the first envelope. The documents inside revealed financial records connecting the Whitmore family to numerous influential individuals. Some names belonged to politicians. Others belonged to industrial magnates and members of parliament. Certain transactions appeared entirely legal. Others seemed designed to conceal the movement of enormous sums of money. As I continued reading, a terrible realization formed. The alliance described by Lord Ashford was not merely protecting wealth, it was manipulating events across the country. Near the bottom of one document, a familiar name caught my attention. My father's signature appeared beside an agreement dated only 3 years earlier. He was still actively involved. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me. The heavy vault door had opened. I quickly gathered the papers and turned around. A young man stood in the doorway. He appeared to be only a few years older than myself. His dark coat was elegant but practical, and his expression suggested urgency rather than hostility. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "we do not have much time. If you wish to stay alive, you must leave immediately. Before I could answer, he added something that sent a chill through my entire body. The men following you have already entered the bank. A world behind silk curtains. The young man wasted no time. He took the bundle of documents from my hands, wrapped them in plain brown paper, and placed them inside an ordinary leather satchel. Anyone looking at it would assume it belonged to a clerk or accountant. We left the vault through a side corridor used by bank employees. As we emerged onto a narrow London street, I finally asked who he was. "My name is Edward Hale," he replied. "Lord Ashford sent me. I work for him." The answer raised even more questions, but the urgency in his voice convinced me not to argue. We walked quickly through crowded streets where the realities of Victorian London surrounded us. Only a few miles separated the wealthy districts from neighborhoods of extreme poverty. Elegant ladies stepped from luxury carriages while exhausted. Factory workers hurried to work 10-hour shifts. Children sold newspapers on street corners. Chimneys filled the sky with smoke from hundreds of factories. Growing up on a country estate, I had rarely seen this side of England. Wealth had sheltered me from it. By the time I returned to the townhouse, preparations were already underway for another evening gathering. Such events consumed much of upper-class life. Maintaining social connections was practically a full-time occupation. Every afternoon, ladies changed dresses for tea. Calling cards were exchanged. Invitations arrived daily. Servants constantly polished silver, arranged flowers, and prepared elaborate meals. Even simple appearances required tremendous effort behind the scenes. Upstairs, my maid Emily was waiting to help me dress for dinner. Like most wealthy women, I could not easily dress myself. Corsets required tightening. Layers of petticoats had to be arranged correctly. Buttons and ribbons often ran down the entire length of a gown. Emily worked quietly, but that evening she seemed unusually nervous. Finally she spoke. "Miss Charlotte, may I ask something?" I nodded. She hesitated before continuing. "Have you been looking into your grandmother's past?" My heart nearly stopped. I turned toward her. "Why would you ask that?" Emily lowered her voice. "Because my mother worked here when your grandmother was alive. She used to tell stories about her. Stories the family did not like." For the next few minutes, Emily revealed something fascinating. Among the servants, my grandmother had been remembered very differently than among the family. While society saw her as a respectable aristocratic lady, the staff remembered her kindness. She often visited the kitchens, spoke with workers by name, and secretly paid for medical treatment when servants became ill. In an era when class divisions were rigid, such behavior was unusual. She believed people deserved dignity regardless of wealth, Emily said. Many never forgot it. That evening during dinner, I found myself studying the guests differently. Before, I had only seen wealth and elegance. Now, I noticed the calculations behind every conversation. Parents quietly evaluated potential marriage matches. Business partners discussed investments disguised as casual conversation. Alliances were formed over soup courses and dessert trays. Every smile seemed to hide another purpose. Then something unexpected happened. As the musicians played in the ballroom, a servant discreetly approached me. Without speaking, he handed me a folded note and disappeared into the crowd. I waited until no one was watching before opening it. The message contained only a single sentence. "Trust no one inside this house. They already know about the bank." 2 different worlds. I read the note several times before carefully hiding it inside my glove. "Trust no one inside this house. They already know about the bank." The words echoed in my mind throughout the evening. Around me, the ballroom continued to sparkle with wealth and elegance. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight. Ladies wore gowns that cost more than many workers earned in a year. Servants moved silently through the room, carrying silver trays filled with pastries, wine, and imported fruits. Yet for the first time, I noticed something I had ignored my entire life. The people serving us seemed almost invisible to the guests. Wealthy families depended on dozens of workers every day, but rarely treated them as equals. A servant could spend years in a household and still be addressed only by their surname or position. Most aristocrats believed this was simply the natural order of society. The next morning, I convinced Mother to allow me to visit one of the charitable schools our family financially supported. Such visits were considered respectable activities for young ladies. Wealthy women were expected to participate in charity work. Though often from a comfortable distance, many viewed poverty as unfortunate but inevitable. They donated money while remaining far removed from the realities of the poor. As our carriage traveled east through London, the city gradually changed. The elegant buildings disappeared. Streets became narrower and dirtier. Laundry hung from windows. Children played barefoot near crowded tenements. The smell of coal smoke mixed with sewage and factory fumes. It was difficult to believe. This was the same city where grand balls and dinner parties took place. At the school, dozens of children sat in cramped classrooms learning basic reading and arithmetic. Their clothing was worn and patched. Some looked hungry, yet many smiled when visitors arrived. During the tour, I spoke with a young girl named Lucy. She could not have been older than 10. She explained that she worked several hours each day helping her mother sew garments for a textile company. Her father had died in a factory accident 2 years earlier. Despite everything, she proudly showed me a notebook filled with her lessons. She dreamed of becoming a teacher someday. Her determination moved me deeply. On our way back, our carriage slowed near a factory at the end of a long street. Hundreds of workers were leaving after their shift. Men, women, and even children emerged looking exhausted. Their faces were stained with soot. Many had been working since before sunrise. I suddenly remembered the financial records I had discovered in the bank. One of the companies listed their own factories, very much like this one. The alliances, wealth depended partly upon the labor of people who would never attend their parties or enter their homes. That evening, I asked Father whether he had ever visited the factories connected to our investments. He looked surprised by the question. Such matters are managed by directors, he replied. Why would I visit personally? His answer revealed more than he intended. To families like ours, wealth often felt disconnected from the people who created it. Money arrived through investments, estates, and businesses, while the difficult realities remained hidden behind reports and ledgers. Later that night, Emily secretly entered my room, carrying a tray of tea. Once the door was closed, she leaned closer and lowered her voice. Miss Charlotte, someone has been searching your room again. This time they looked beneath your mattress. A chill ran through me. The notebook was no longer there. Earlier that day, I had hidden it elsewhere. Whoever was searching had found nothing. Emily glanced nervously toward the hallway. Then she whispered something even more alarming. I think the person looking for it is not a servant. I think it is someone from your own family. The perfect family. For the next several days, I could hardly focus on anything except Emily's warning. Someone in my own family might be searching for the notebook. The thought followed me through every room of the townhouse. At breakfast, I studied my parents and brothers differently. Their faces seemed familiar, yet I wondered how much I truly knew about them. Wealthy Victorian families often spent more time maintaining appearances than sharing honest conversations. Children were raised by governesses and nannies. Fathers focused on business and politics. Mothers supervised social obligations and household management. Even within the same home, family members could remain strangers to one another. The following Sunday, we attended church as we always did. Religion played an important role in Victorian society, especially among the upper classes. Families sat in reserved pews according to their status. Clothing was carefully chosen. Every gesture was observed by neighbors and acquaintances. As our carriage arrived, I noticed how people reacted to Father. Shopkeepers greeted him respectfully. Clergymen shook his hand. Other gentlemen seemed eager to gain his approval. Influence often mattered as much as money. After the service, Father spent nearly an hour speaking with local businessmen and politicians. Meanwhile, several poor families waited nearby to receive charitable food parcels distributed by wealthy donors. The contrast was striking. The rich discussed investments and estates, while struggling families quietly waited for bread, vegetables, and coal vouchers. One elderly woman caught my attention. Her coat was threadbare, and her hands looked rough from years of labor. When she approached the distribution table, one of the organizers spoke to her impatiently, as though she were a burden rather than a human being. Yet moments later, the same organizer greeted an aristocratic guest with perfect politeness. The difference in treatment disturbed me. That evening, I asked Mother whether she had ever worried about the conditions many workers faced. She looked surprised by the question. "My dear, poverty has always existed," she replied. "We support charities and churches. There is only so much one can do." Her answer reflected the attitude of many wealthy Victorians. Some genuinely cared and donated generously. Others believed social classes existed for a reason and rarely questioned the system. A few days later, I discovered another unexpected source of information. While walking through the servants' corridor, I overheard two footmen speaking quietly. They stopped immediately when they saw me, but not before I heard my grandmother's name. I politely asked them to continue. At first they refused. Eventually, one of them admitted that older servants still told stories about her. According to them, she often disguised herself in plain clothing and visited poorer districts of London without informing the family. She wanted to see how ordinary people lived. Such behavior would have shocked many aristocrats. That night, I searched through the notebook again. Hidden between 2 pages, I found a folded newspaper clipping. It described a factory fire from nearly 20 years earlier. Several workers had died. What caught my attention was the company name. It matched one of the businesses connected to the alliance. Someone had circled a sentence in red ink. "The owners deny responsibility." Below the clipping, my grandmother had written a short note. This was where I first learned the truth. My pulse quickened. Whatever secret she had uncovered seemed connected not only to wealth and power, but also to the suffering of ordinary people. As I stared at her handwriting, a sudden knock sounded at my bedroom door. When I opened it, no one was there. Only a small package rested on the floor. Inside was a silver pocket watch. Engraved on the back were 4 words: "Ask Edward about Manchester." Wealth existed here, but it wore a different face. Instead of country estates and aristocratic titles, power belonged to industrialists and businessmen. As our carriage carried us through the city, I noticed children selling newspapers, women carrying baskets of laundry, and men emerging from factories covered in soot. Many looked older than their years. Hard work and difficult living conditions left visible marks on people. Finally, we stopped outside a modest boarding house. According to Edward, my grandmother had stayed there during her investigation. The building appeared ordinary. Its brick walls showed signs of age, and the paint around the windows was peeling. Yet something about it made my pulse quicken. This place connected directly to her final months. As we entered the lobby, the elderly owner looked up from her desk. The moment she heard my surname, her eyes widened with surprise. For several seconds she stared at me. Then she quietly said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Your grandmother was here the night before she disappeared." The hidden room, the elderly owner of the boarding house, introduced herself as Mrs. Carter. Even though decades had passed, she remembered my grandmother clearly. According to her, wealthy ladies rarely stayed in places like this. Most aristocrats preferred luxury, hotels with private servants and elegant dining rooms. My grandmother had been different. She dressed simply, spoke kindly to everyone, and spent more time with workers and local families than with Manchester's wealthy industrialists. Mrs. Carter led us to a small sitting room at the back of the building. The furniture was old, but carefully maintained. A coal fire burned softly in the fireplace. As we sat down, she explained that my grandmother had rented the same room for several weeks while investigating the factory fire. She often returned late at night carrying notebooks and newspapers. Sometimes she met journalists. Other times she spoke with workers who had survived dangerous conditions inside the mills. One evening, shortly before her disappearance, she appeared frightened. She told Mrs. Carter that powerful people were watching her. She believed someone had discovered what she was investigating. The story sounded disturbingly familiar. Before leaving the next morning, My grandmother handed Mrs. Carter a small envelope and asked her to keep it safe. She said that one day, a member of the Whitmore family might return seeking answers. Mrs. Carter had honored that promise for more than 20 years. She opened a drawer and carefully removed the envelope. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten note and a brass key. The note contained only a few sentences. If you are reading this, then the truth has survived. The evidence is hidden where they would never think to look. Trust actions, not titles. The final line included a simple instruction. Ask for room 7. Edward and I exchanged confused glances. Mrs. Carter immediately stood. Room 7 has been locked for years, she said quietly. No guests, stay there. We followed her upstairs. The boarding house creaked with age. Narrow hallways stretched beneath low ceilings. Unlike the grand houses of the wealthy, every inch of space here served a practical purpose. Families often rented single rooms. Travelers shared bathrooms. Workers sometimes slept 2 or 3 to a bed to save money. Victorian life could be vastly different depending on social class. At the end of the corridor stood a weathered door marked with the number 7. Mrs. Carter unlocked it and stepped aside. Dust covered the furniture. Sunlight filtered through faded curtain. At first glance, the room appeared empty. Yet something felt unusual. Edward noticed it first. One section of the wall sounded hollow when tapped. Together, we moved an old wardrobe aside. Hidden behind it was a narrow wooden panel. The brass key fit perfectly into a small lock. My heart pounded as the panel slowly opened. Inside was a concealed compartment containing several journals, financial records, newspaper clippings, and dozens of letters. More evidence than my grandmother could ever have carried home. For years it had remained hidden in this forgotten room. Then I spotted one final item resting at the very back. A recent document. Unlike everything else, it was only a few months old. Someone had visited the secret compartment recently, and at the bottom of the page was a signature I recognized instantly. My father's secret. For several moments, I simply stared at the signature. The document was dated only 6 months earlier. My father had been here, not years ago, not decades ago, recently. The realization left me speechless. Everything I had discovered seemed to point toward the past, toward secrets buried long before my birth. Yet this document proved that the story was still unfolding. Whatever the alliance was hiding remained important, enough for my father to travel to Manchester and search this very room. Edward carefully examined the paper. It appeared to be a visitor record written by my grandmother many years ago. Besides several names, someone had added notes in newer handwriting. My father's handwriting. He had been tracking the same evidence we were now uncovering. The question was why. Had he come to destroy it or to protect it? Mrs. Carter watched us quietly. Finally, she spoke. He was not alone when he visited. There were 3 men with him. They searched this room for hours. They seemed desperate to find something. Did they succeed? I asked. She shook her head. Not as far as I know. They left angry. That answer offered a small sense of relief. Somewhere within these journals and documents, something remained hidden. We spent the rest of the afternoon examining every page. My grandmother's investigation had been remarkably thorough. She documented unsafe factory conditions, bribery involving local officials, manipulated inspections, and efforts to silence journalists. The alliance had not simply protected wealth, it had protected corruption. Yet one journal stood apart from the others. Its entries were deeply personal. Instead of financial records, it contained observations about people, workers she had met, families affected by industrial accidents, children forced into labor. Reading her words, I began to understand why she had become so determined. For many wealthy Victorians, poverty remained an abstract issue discussed in newspapers and charity meetings. My grandmother had chosen to witness it directly. One entry described a family of 6 living in a single damp room beside a factory canal. Another told of a 12-year-old boy who lost part of his hand in a machine accident. These were not statistics to her. They were human beings. As evening approached, Edward discovered a folded map hidden inside the journal cover. Several locations had been marked in pencil. Most were factories connected to the alliance. One mark, however, stood alone outside the city. Beside it, my grandmother had written 2 words: "Final proof." A heavy silence filled the room. We all understood the significance. Whatever evidence she considered most important was hidden there. Before we could discuss our next move, loud voices echoed from downstairs. A door slammed. Footsteps hurried through the boarding house. Mrs. Carter's face immediately turned pale. She moved toward the window and carefully looked outside. More than a dozen men were gathering near the entrance. Several wore dark coats. One carried a list of names. Another was speaking directly with people on the street. Edward crossed the room and looked through the curtains. "They found us," he said quietly. My pulse quickened. How? We had traveled carefully. We had spoken to no one. Yet somehow our enemies knew exactly where we were. Then, among the men below, I recognized a familiar face. He was one of the men who had accompanied my father in Hyde Park. And this time, they were not searching for documents. They were searching for us. The last piece of evidence. The moment Edward recognized the men outside, he began gathering the documents. We could not carry everything. There were simply too many journals, records, and letters. For years, my grandmother had collected evidence against some of the most powerful people in Britain. Now those same people were closing in on us. Mrs. Carter quickly locked the room door while Edward searched for another exit. The boarding house had stood for nearly 50 years, and like many older buildings, it contained narrow service passages originally built for staff. Wealthier homes often had entire networks of servant corridors hidden behind walls so that servants could move through the house without disturbing their employers. This building was smaller, but it followed the same idea. Within minutes, Mrs. Carter led us through a concealed doorway behind a linen cupboard. The passage was cramped and dark. Dust filled the air. As we hurried downward, I could hear voices entering the boarding house below. The search had begun. We emerged into a narrow alley behind the building and immediately disappeared into the evening crowd. Manchester's streets remained busy even after sunset. Factory shifts ended at different hours, and workers filled the roads, returning to crowded neighborhoods. The city itself became our protection. No one paid much attention to 3 ordinary figures moving through the crowd. By midnight, we had reached a small house belonging to one of Edward's trusted friends. There, for the first time, we were able to carefully examine the map my grandmother had left behind. The location marked "Final Proof" lay several miles outside the city, near an abandoned textile mill. According to local records, the mill had closed years earlier following financial difficulties. Yet my grandmother's notes suggested something else. Several alliance members had secretly met there after the factory fire. Investigation began. If she had hidden her most important evidence anywhere, it would be there. Early the next morning, we hired a carriage and began the journey. As we traveled through the industrial outskirts of Manchester, I observed another side of Victorian life. Rows of worker housing stretched beside factories and canals. Children played near brick buildings, blackened by decades of coal smoke. Women scrubbed laundry by hand, while men headed toward another day of labor. For many families, life followed the same exhausting routine year after year. The wealth generated by industry transformed Britain, but its rewards were not shared equally. By midday, the abandoned mill finally appeared on the horizon. The building looked enormous, despite years of neglect. Broken windows lined its upper floors. Tall chimneys stood silent against the gray sky. Nature had begun reclaiming parts of the property. We entered cautiously. The interior was cold and dark. Rusted machinery sat motionless beneath layers of dust. It was difficult to imagine that hundreds of workers had once filled these rooms every day. Following clues from the map, we eventually reached the old manager's office on the top floor. There, hidden beneath loose floorboards, we discovered a small iron box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a collection of letters unlike anything we had seen before. These were not records of corruption or business agreements. They were personal letters exchanged between alliance members. In them, Powerful men openly discussed covering up dangerous conditions inside factories. They discussed bribing officials. They discussed silencing journalists. Most shocking of all, one letter directly referenced my grandmother. If she refuses to stop asking questions, stronger measures may become necessary. The letter had been written only weeks before her reported illness. A terrible silence filled the room. At last, we had found the proof, not only of corruption, but possibly of what had happened to my grandmother. Then a sound echoed from below. Footsteps, dozens of them. Edward moved to the window, and his face immediately hardened. They were here. Carriages surrounded the mill from every direction. There would be no escape this time. And standing beside the lead carriage was my father. The truth revealed, my father stood in the doorway of the abandoned mill, surrounded by men who had spent months pursuing us. For a moment, no one moved. The cold wind drifted through the broken windows while dust swirled across the floorboards. I expected anger. I expected threats. Instead, my father looked exhausted, older than I had ever seen him. His eyes settled on the letters spread across the table. Then he spoke quietly. "So you found it." Edward stepped protectively in front of me, but my father raised a hand. "There will be no violence today. Not from me." The men behind him remained silent. Slowly, my father entered the room. He looked at the evidence my grandmother had hidden so many years ago. The letters, the records, the confessions, the proof, everything she had sacrificed herself to protect. "You deserve to know the truth, Charlotte," he said. "Your grandmother was right. The alliance was corrupt. Powerful men placed profits above human lives. They bribed officials. They silenced journalists. They destroyed anyone who threatened their interests. When your grandmother uncovered the truth, she planned to expose them." I felt my heart pounding. "Then what happened to her?" My father's expression darkened. "She never intended to disappear. She became ill suddenly, very suddenly. Some believed it was natural. Others suspected otherwise. We never found proof. But after her death, the alliance made certain every investigation ended. They feared what she knew. For years, I hated my father for hiding the truth. Yet now I saw something different. He had been trapped as well, bound by obligations, expectations, and dangers created long before he was born. "Why did you follow us?" I asked. "Because I knew they would," he replied. "I searched for the evidence before they could find it. I wanted to protect it until the right moment. I simply never expected that moment would belong to you." The room fell silent. Then one of the men standing outside suddenly spoke. "Several members of the alliance have already turned against one another. Newspapers are investigating. Politicians are asking questions. Their power is weakening." For the first time, hope appeared. My grandmother's work had survived. The truth had survived. The evidence we now possessed could finally expose decades of corruption. In the months that followed, documents were delivered to trusted journalists and reformers. Investigations spread across the country. Factory owners faced scrutiny. Officials were questioned. Some powerful figures resigned. Others disappeared from public life entirely. Change did not happen overnight, but it began. As for me, I returned home a very different person. The world beyond the walls of wealth and privilege could no longer be ignored. I continued the work my grandmother had started. I visited schools, hospitals, and worker communities. I listened. I learned. Most importantly, I never forgot that behind every statistic, every report, and every business decision were real human lives. Years later, I often found myself standing at the same window where this journey began. The horizon no longer represented mystery. It represented possibility. My grandmother once believed the truth must survive. In the end, it did. And so did her legacy. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Victorian England. A world of grand mansions, strict social rules, hidden secrets, and extraordinary courage. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe and follow the channel. Here you will discover more fascinating stories from the Victorian era, real historical details, daily life of the rich and poor, forgotten mysteries, and unforgettable adventures from one of history's most fascinating periods. Until the next story.